Thank you so much. Welcome to the UC Global Health Day. My name is Ndola Prata, and I'm the co-director for the University of California Global Health Institute. I'm also a professor of maternal child and adolescent health at University of California, Berkeley in the School of Public Health, and director of the Bixby Center for Population Health and Sustainability. It is my pleasure to be the morning moderator today and welcome you all to the University of California Global Health Day at UC Santa Cruz. A round of applause to Santa Cruz, please. This year's theme is Centering Social Justice in Community Health, and we have an amazing program for you today. I heard we have more than 350 people attending or registered to attend, and a lot more online. So welcome everybody also on Zoom. So we're gonna start today with, I will introduce Dr. Cynthia Lariff, the Chancellor of UC Santa Cruz, for the kickoff of today's program. Chancellor Lariff, please.
Good morning. Welcome to the 2022 Global Health Day Conference. We are so proud at UC Santa Cruz to be hosting this important event this year. It is truly an honor to contribute to the 10-campus UC Global Health Institute, and the timing is particularly good for Santa Cruz this year, as this fall we will be launching 2 new degrees, a BA and a BS in Global and Community Health. For the benefit of our students, these degrees are interdisciplinary by design, and they're closely integrated. The goal is to educate a new generation of health leaders and health workers with expertise drawn from a wide array of disciplines and with the ability to communicate and learn from one another across a wide diversity of perspectives. While our focus is increasingly interdisciplinary, UC Santa Cruz remains committed to disciplinary knowledge, and we have departments, research centers, and faculty from all 5 of our academic divisions with a long and distinguished history of contributing health-related research and teaching. But with the same inclusive big tent vision of the global health that UCGHI has fostered, our new degrees aim to combine the basis of campus expertise to maximize the educational benefits to our students. Through this interdisciplinary education, we also hope to contribute to the health of all the communities, both global and local, that our students will work in the future. Our BA students will learn about the social, cultural, political, and economic determinants of health and of health policy, and also about how these social forces intersect with biological and environmental influences across scales, from the molecular to the planetary. They'll learn how to put local community experiences of health and health vulnerability into national and global contexts. And they will develop critical, cultural, legal, and historical literacy about associated narratives and the representations of disease and well-being and health rights. Our BS students will learn about the biological and environmental bases of health and disease, and about how social, political, and economic and cultural influences interact with biology and the environment to create uneven patterns of disease and well-being in communities. They will gain a solid grounding in cell molecular biology, human physiology, and environmental determinants of health, and will learn about how these factors then become embodied with divergent outcomes in different social and clinical settings. Most importantly, the education of students in both our new degree pathways will also benefit from wider commitments to social justice that has been held in a prominent place on our campus since our founding. Just like UCGHI, we do not want global health to simply be words in the title of a course or degree, but rather something that we actively advance in the world at large. And for us, that means centering social justice in community health too, the theme of this exciting conference. We're thrilled to host you for this day's events, whether you are joining them in person or online. And we're excited by the terrific lineup of speakers, including leaders from the Navajo Nation, whose HEAL initiative work we'll hear about later in the day. I would now like to introduce our University of California president. Dr. Michael V. Drake was unable to be here in person today, but he did pass along this pre-recorded message.
Good morning. On behalf of the University of California, I am pleased to welcome you to the UC Global Health Day. Each year, this event brings together passionate people around the world, all dedicated to improving health for all. It is an inspiring showcase of research, training, and outreach in global health. As a research institution, the University of California is deeply committed to global health. I'm thrilled to see UC campuses coming together to tap into the latest innovations in global health and to build a better future for our whole planet. I'm inspired by this year's theme, Centering Social Justice in Community Health. We are at a critical moment for our society and planet, and I know your work is helping us understand how we might achieve a better future for all. Thank you for participating in this collaborative gathering and sharing insights to make the world a healthier, more equitable place. I wish you all a productive and inspiring day.
Thank you, Chancellor Lariff, and thank you, President Drake, for the warm welcome. I would now like to introduce Alexi Sigona, who will be doing the land acknowledgement. Alexi is an Amamutsun PhD candidate at the University of California, Berkeley, specializing in indigenous environmental studies. His work centers Amamutsun collaborative culture and natural resource management and land rights. Alexi has been a seasonal land steward with the Amamutsun Land Trust since 2018. He's also a leader of the Amamutsun Youth Group. He serves as the co-chair of the Amamutsun Land Trust Lands Committee, and he's on the advisory board for Green Foothills. Please welcome Alexi.
Mishmin Arua, everyone. Good morning. It's great to be here. My name is Alexi Sigona, and I'm a representative from the Amamutsun tribal band. The Amamutsun are descendants of indigenous peoples taken to Mission Santa Cruz and Mission San Juan Bautista. And to my family, Santa Cruz has always been a special place. One elder, Denise, has shared this really great story with me in the 1960s and 70s. Doing, protesting here in Santa Cruz, and also a student here. Denise was in downtown Santa Cruz, protesting for farm workers' rights. And there, an elder white lady came up to her and said, "Go back to where you came from." And Denise said, "Well, I'm from right around the corner." And so, this has always been a bit complicated because, Denise and other elders grew up hearing that they are from, they are Santa Cruz Indians. They're from the Mission Santa Cruz. But more recently, the Amamutsun realized that our lineage and our village sites don't actually come from the Santa Cruz area of the Awaswas-speaking peoples. Instead, where our villages come more inland into the Mutsun-speaking peoples in the San Juan Bautista area. And Awaswas actually just means Westerners in the Mutsun language as well. So I think it's important to make that clear, that the village sites of our ancestors are not here on Awaswa speaking lands of the UP tribe, but instead, because there are no known descendants of the UP people who have come forward today, that we're here just to honor the ancestors and restore the indigenous stewardship that took place here for millennia. But also, people had ceremonies together, families married, and so that's really important to think about, that these boundaries that we have today about different nations and villages are not always as, concrete as we might think today. But I'm really excited to be here because, thinking about conversations around social justice, but also here at UC, we're here on stolen land, and so we have, an obligation to center indigenous peoples when we're talking about social justice. Because for social justice to be, actualized, we must really sit with the fact that UC was founded by the Moral Act, right? The sale of indigenous lands. And it's kind of ironic, as a UC student, I study access to sacred lands, and looking at a map of the Moral Act, I realized one of our most sacred sites was sold to fund the endowment of University of California. So as a student trying to figure out how to get access to this site, I realized that, well, as a UC student, maybe I'm part of this problem too. But, I'm really excited to see that there's more opportunity for Native American students here at the UCs. Some of you may have seen the recent scholarship initiatives for federally recognized and non-recognized tribes at UC, and I think that's such a great accomplishment. So I don't want to keep you all waiting. There are so many wonderful speakers here today, and I'm just so delighted to share this space today. And I think it's also great that the organizers decided to meaningfully involve Amamutsun people today. So Chairman Lopez and I will be speaking at 2:50 p.m. So it's not just a 5-minute land acknowledgement and we're done. We're here to have a conversation with you all, and we're hoping to have a really nice discussion later today. And thinking about what health means for indigenous peoples, it's about access to lands. It's about culturally important foods, culturally important medicinal plants. And so, I think as we continue this relationship with UC, University of California, and California Native communities, we need to think more about what health means for these peoples. And the UC system has a lot of land, and I think that's really important to think about, where we can bring in indigenous peoples to steward these lands, to care for them, and for people to be able to have culturally relevant medicine and food ways for healing. And we'll be talking a bit more about that today. So I just want to, remind y'all to keep in mind the indigenous ancestors of this place, your ancestors as well, as we try to honor those and heal, people who have perpetrated trauma and people who have experienced trauma also need to heal as well. So we all need healing today. And I'm just so grateful to be here. And I'm looking forward to all the conversations that will take place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexi, for the land acknowledgement. Please don't miss this afternoon breakout session called Recognizing the Impacts of Historic Trauma on Mental Health and Pathways to Healing for Native and Indigenous Communities, presented by Amamutsun tribal members. So please make sure that you go to this session. So continuing with our program today, it's my pleasure to introduce our opening plenary speaker, Dr. Rupa Marya. She's an associate professor of medicine at University of California, San Francisco, and the founder of the Deep Medicine Circle. Today, the title of her talk is Deep Medicine and the Care Revolution. Dr. Marya has a band named Rupa and the April Fishes. So be sure to listen today and join later on the outdoor concert at the end of the day. I'm ready to dance, even though it's still morning. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rupa Marya and the members of her band, Misha Kalilukov on cello, Aaron Kerbel on cajon, and Mario Alberto Silva on trumpet.
Thank you so much for having me here today with my brothers. For many years, we've been playing together. And I just ask, because I have unvaccinated children, if you would all do me the great care of putting your masks on, because that will help ensure that when I take my mask off, that I'll be safer. Thank you. So again, this is Misha Kalakula on cello, Mario Belter Silva on trumpet, and Aaron Kerbel on cajon. My name is Rupa, and I just want to start by acknowledging a very dear friend and elder here today, Catalina Gomes, a Ramaytush elder, also from this beautiful peninsula. I was born and raised in Ramaytush territory. I am the daughter of Punjabi immigrants. My family came here because of all the wealth that was stolen from our homelands, an estimated $62 trillion of wealth during the colonization of India. And I work as a physician in hospital medicine in Ramaytush territory. And I grew up always having a consciousness and feeling of an ancient presence here that reminded me of the presence I feel in India. But I didn't really understand it when I would go and see the strip malls and the 280 freeway. And I didn't really start to understand it until I would spend time in spaces like the Redwood Groves or the Bay Groves or the Oak Savannas and started listening more carefully to the land. So I'm very grateful for all the people who have taught me what I'm going to share with you today. This knowledge and this information I share is not mine, but it's a culmination of many ways of knowing that I've been very honored to participate. And I decided to bring my music with me today and my friends with me because it's another way of knowing. So music allows us to see with many eyes, to hear multiple realities at once. And with the immensity of the problems we're facing today, with the systems level derangements of climate change and pandemic, we can't rely on the same ways of thinking and knowing and diagnosing. So if our diagnosis is wrong about what we're facing, if our diagnosis doesn't take in all of the lines of narrative, all of the ways of seeing, we don't get the right way forward. And then we're stuck in repeated waves of viral transmission. We get stuck in repeated waves of devastating heat, crop failures right now in India. So these kinds of problems require a different kind of diagnosis. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So every diagnosis is a story. In every story, the time and place matter. And the time and place that we're going to think about today is the dawn of colonial capitalism. Now, colonization has been a reality of human history since the dawn of humanity. But this current version of colonial capitalism combines a violent, extractive, destructive economic force that depends upon axes of domination that create widespread damage. And the outcome of that damage is inflammation. So as a doctor at UCSF, the greatest burden of diseases I treat are diseases of chronic inflammation. Whether it's cardiovascular disease or cancer or diabetes or Alzheimer's or substance use disorder or depression, we're now learning that all of these diseases have at their root, in their pathogenesis, inflammation. And so I started to think about, as I traveled between the bedside and the hospital and then going on the road with my bandmates, to communities where I could see the interaction between health and society really clearly, I started to notice these patterns. that groups that were impacted by these forces more intensely were overexpressing diseases of chronic inflammation. So I started to look at that with my co-author Raj Patel in our book Inflamed. And I'm going to share some of these thoughts with you today. So inflammation, for those of you who went to medical school or took a basic immunology class, inflammation is the body's response to damage, the innate immune system's response to damage or the threat of damage. So you can see it when you get a paper cut. Your body mobilizes, the immune system mobilizes cells and cellular mediators to address the damage and to heal the wound. So in an acute inflammatory response, when the damage is healed, when the wound is healed, the inflammation goes quiet. So this is a healing response. When the damage keeps coming, or the threat of damage keeps coming, the innate immune system's response becomes one of additional harm. So those mediators go on unabated and create a chronic smoldering fire inside the body. And that is exactly what we're seeing with chronic inflammatory disease. When we think about the locus of pathology of understanding in medicine, Western medicine has evolved from back in the 6th century BCE. Akkadian cuneiform symbols were putting together fever and inflammation, understanding a connection between these things. And it was in the 20th century BCE when the Roman physician Celsus codified the cardinal signs of inflammation: redness and swelling and pain and heat. And then throughout the 1700s, up until the 1700s, there were various theories about why people were getting sick. There were miasmas and humors and ways of describing the imbalances happening in the body. But it was in the 1800s when a French biologist, Broussais, understood that disease, what we were seeing pathologically, was happening inside the body in a particular location. And that's where we understood that inflammation was happening inside the body, in an organ or in an area, a geographic area of the body. This created a revolution in medical physiology and became a very important way of understanding what was going on with people. So arthritis was swelling of the joints, and pericarditis, swelling of the sac around the heart, all the different itises, meningitis. And then in 1848, a young German physician who I learned about through Virchow's triad and Virchow's node, I didn't learn that he was a revolutionary standing on the barricades fighting German colonization of Europe. Virchow understood that the location of disease wasn't necessarily in the body, it was in how the body was responding to the circumstances around the body. So he really offered us a way of thinking about the social environmental impacts on the body and how that was priming the body to have a certain outcome. And this is very interesting to think about right now during COVID, when we see that not all bodies respond the same way. In 2005, environmental health community really helped elucidate this concept of the exposome. And the exposome, which is thought of as the sum total of lifetime exposures from conception onward, is where we can start to think of as the locus of pathology of chronic inflammatory disease. So the immune system isn't so much fighting self versus other, but rather harmonizing our bodies to the social environment, the exposome around us. So if our exposome has been shaped through history and intergenerational trauma, through today's structures of power, through the cosmologies we're told about who we are in the world and our place in it, through the stories even that we're told as a child, if those exposures are toxic or damaging or induce damage, the body will respond with inflammation. And that's what we're seeing. And that's a very useful thought, because when we look at the rising rates of diabetes around the world, giving insulin is not going to treat the problem. Changing the food system might. Changing the exposure to chronic debt or exhaustive heat. These are the kinds of things that we need to start thinking about, is redesigning the exposome to address to address these illnesses. When we look at the cellular level, at what's happening, how the exposome is translated down into our cellular mediators, I made these schematics with a great local artist, Aaron Hunter, to help describe what's happening. So when our cells, our replicating cells, which are our somatic cells, not our germline cells, but the cells in our bodies that replicate, when they are exposed to damage chronically, and this could be stress, working the night shift, debt. How many of us here are carrying debt? Raise your hand. Exactly. So for your house, for your education, for your car, our whole world has been designed by enslaving us through debt. And that debt itself is a driver independently of chronic inflammation. So the fact that we are putting our students at the beginning of their lives into a life doomed with chronic inflammation is deeply problematic. So what happens is these social environmental influences end up causing damage to the mitochondria, to the DNA, through oxidative stress, through inflammatory markers. And so then these cells that are getting damaged through these signals over time accumulate a certain amount of damage and prematurely age. They enter an early senescence. They stop replicating. And they don't stop replicating through normal aging. They're stop replicating through a premature aging caused by damage. These early replicating cells go on to remodel their chromatin and take on a phenotype called the senescence-associated secretory phenotype. This phenotype is essentially a pro-inflammatory cytokine factory, and these cells end up pumping out these pro-inflammatory mediators in the microenvironments of tissues, predisposing those tissues to the development of cancers, to fibrosis that we see in kidney disease or liver disease, also end up expounding these pro-inflammatory markers throughout the body. So you get a chronic sterile inflammation in the body. We have found these SASP cells associated with all of these diseases now. And that's just important to think about how a story that you're told as a child. So if you're a young Black child in the United States, a young Black male, families will sit you down and say, you gotta be careful for the cops. The cops aren't there to help you. The cops could kill you, because that's what happens. And those children need to be made to be prepared. That story itself was found to shorten the telomeres of children as they age. And so this premature aging and damage is critical. Those families have to tell the children that story. The issue is not to stop telling that story. The issue is to stop the police from killing Black children and Black men. And so this kind of thing is also fascinating, because while when cells become SASP cells, it's irreversible, before they enter that cellular arrest, healing is possible. And that's why work around healing from intergenerational trauma and these kinds of traumas and action here is critical. When we look at what's happened with COVID, we can see that those peoples whose bodies have been primed through centuries of chronic oppression had worse outcomes with COVID. So it's not simply a problem of not enough healthcare access. It's a problem of how bodies have been predetermined to worse outcomes. And this is a matter of health justice deeply. And the problem is, even if people get access to healthcare, medicine itself is a part of the problem. So our countries, our homelands, many of us who have come here, even the homelands of people here, were colonized by medics, militaries, and missionaries. And the architecture of dominance that exists in colonial capitalism is rife in every institution that was created through colonial capitalism, as Alexi pointed out, even the University of California. So how do we decolonize these spaces? That requires a kind of thinking that is beyond the reformist attitudes and window dressings that we have been seeing throughout the institutions that many of us work at. That requires a kind of revolution or transformation. Knowing that medicine has been part of the violences of colonialism, these kinds of headlines should not surprise us. It's shocking and devastating, but we are a part of the problem. And we have to recognize that because we have to know the legacies from which we are operating in so that we can change them. And medicine that we have learned and that we continue to learn in school today has been developed through the same intellectual tools that justified the stealing of other people's lands and the extortion of labor of people from around the world. So understanding that the limits of medicine have been embodied, encoded in the intellectual tools. And that's important because even today, as we look at the science of the microbiome and understand that doctors and healthcare workers have to learn how to become ecologists, that we can't simply treat one individual, but we have to treat whole ecosystems of individuals and whole ecosystems of more than human beings around us and inside of us and on us that completely contribute to our health. These ideas are foreign to a system of thought that separates people from nature, man from woman, civilized from savage, and these hierarchies that have been established in this time. One of the most dangerous thoughts of the Enlightenment, which continues to persist today as Elon Musk looks for colonizing Mars, is this concept of progress. And I'm just going to share a brief historical perspective on one of the things I often hear lauded as, well, the great progress of the industrial time was the Transcontinental Railroad. But what did the Transcontinental Railroad require, and what did it do? So the Transcontinental Railroad required that the Plains people, so the many, many nations that lived in the Plains for tens of thousands of years, or if not eternity, and the buffalo that they lived in relationship with had to be removed off the land. So the greatest mammalian genocide in the history of humanity happened here in the United States, thanks to the federal government, and it was the slaughter of over 60 million buffalo to starve the Plains people, the Oceti-Sakowin and other tribes, and to clear the land for the railroad. When you look at this map, you can see the light pink is the historic range of the buffalo. This is where the buffalo were moving and pulsing across the lands. And when you look here, you can see the range of the Plains people, various tribes who moved with the buffalo, who pulsed with the buffalo, who tended the grasslands. This dotted line outlines the Prairie Lands. The Prairie Lands had tall grasses and medium grasses and short grasses. And all of these grasses had roots that were very deep, and that the system on the grasslands were polycultural. And these roots went down 20 and 30 feet deep into the soil. The soil was rich with organic matter. When the buffalo went through and ate the grass, the root pruning would happen. It would be a carbon pump back into the soil. The native people recognized how deep the roots were and how to pulse with both fire and movement of buffalo to generate the richest grasses possible. So with these roots extending so deep into the soil, the water would trickle down, and the water trickled down to create the Oglala Aquifer. So this fire here, the indigenous people of the plain would notice how the lightning would strike and the fire would burn through. And then the next year, the grasses would be greener. And then the more buffalo would come because that grass was delicious. And then the people would use fire to both tend the grasslands and corral the buffalo. So this was a whole ecosystem. And when you look here, you see the largest, what used to be is no longer, the largest body of fresh water in the Oglala Aquifer used to be 174,000 miles of fresh water. But that's not true anymore. That aquifer is drying up. So when the colonizers came and pushed that ecosystem of deep relationality away, they went to go farm the land, and they couldn't cut through that 20-foot sod, right? And so they couldn't plant their seeds of corn, they couldn't plant their soy, they couldn't plant their wheat. And so John Deere in the 1830s developed this steel plow, the moldboard plow, to slice through the earth. And it cut and tilled the soil. And when you open soil like that, it's like releasing a can of soda, and the carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. Tillage practices are some of the most damaging things that leach CO2 from our soil that has been stable back into the atmosphere. And within a few decades, what was this rich, fertile soil that generated the breadbasket of America turned into the Dust Bowl, as all that good organic matter, all those roots were gone. All that relationship was gone. The Oglala aquifer, like I said, is now drying up. And the Oceti-Sakowin have some of the worst health indices here in the Western Hemisphere. So what was once a system of health has now become a system of damage. And if you think that's something that is past history, it's not. This is a picture I took driving through Kern County here in California in the Valley just in October. We see rates of valley fever going up. We see the soil aerosolized. So this is a huge problem for us today, and it has to do with how we relate to each other. So if our minds for solution are being circumscribed by a colonial capitalist logic, we won't arrive at the kinds of solutions we need right now that must be transformational to address the crises of health we are facing right now with pandemic and climate change. Colonial capitalist logic fails to see and address the systems level interaction. It likes to atomize these things and see them as distinctly different, as opposed to see the web of interrelationships. Because through atomizing it, you can establish and maintain order and power dynamics. It defines and limits personhood. So when I look outside at these trees have been relatives to people like Kata for thousands of years. These are people. When you look at a mountain, our indigenous communities see that mountain as a person. When you look at a body of water, you would never throw toxic chemicals in it because that water is alive. It has a personhood. It's much easier to riddle a mountain with holes if you deny its personhood. It's much easier to enslave a whole group of people if you deny their personhood. So this logic of limiting rights and responsibilities is hallmark of an extractivist colonial capitalist system. It creates and militantly enforces borders between people, between lands, between the concepts of nation states, which are relatively new inventions, and it separates us from each other, separates us from our responsibilities from one another. We're seeing that right now with COVID, which has now become a choose your own adventure public health strategy in the United States. And I'm sad and ashamed to say that much of that information is coming from my own institution. It reproduces itself through the educational system. So what you learn in medical school has been already circumscribed for you. And it severs the relationship between peoples and between humans in the web of life. And this is probably the most critical thing when we think about what we need to reestablish for a reasonable response to the systems level problems we see. I took this screenshot from my Epic. So when I log into Epic as a doctor, and they took like 5 years to put this on Epic, and they were like, oh, we're making a structural determinants of health thing that everyone can fill out. And I was like, okay, is it going to include experiences of racism and how people are aligned in a colonial capitalist arrangements? And they said, no, we're going to ask them if they smoke and if they drink, and do they have, transportation? So this I call this the liberal logic. So you're kind of talking about it, but you're not really talking about it. You're kind of motioning towards it, but you're not really getting at the root, the radical, which is root. You're not getting at the root. So you won't actually get at the proper solution. Deep medicine is what Raj Patel and I outline in our book, which is something different. Deep medicine is an idea that we borrowed from deep ecology. Deep ecology does not center humans in ecosystems, but looks at the phenomenon of health of an ecosystem as an emergent phenomenon, just like music. You have a melody line, you have another sound, and another sound. And what becomes the song is greater than the sum of its parts. And that's what deep medicine is. It's recognizing that to get health and understand that health is not simply just a property of individuals, but a property of systems working well, we have to reimagine the world around us. We have to abolish capitalism. We have to start imagining an economy of care. We have to start putting that into practice, not just locally, but globally around the world, so that we can ensure the safety and wellness of as many people and non-human people as possible. We must deny the logic of borders and policing, and we must repair the harms for groups who are most impacted by colonialism. So I applaud the University of California for opening tuition for Native Americans. And I wish they would also contend with the fact that the federal government, and by the time colonizers came to California, they stopped recognizing Native people with that right. So most of my friends who are Native Californians do not have federal recognized status. So we need to fix that. And we need to think about how to give land back, how to reassert indigenous sovereignty on their lands, and work together to advance this culture of care. So like I said, it's nothing short of reimagining the world and understanding that revolution, transformational action, is an act of care and an act of courage. It is not burning things down and running around with pitchforks. It doesn't have to only be that way. The most potent revolution is the revolution of love and the revolution of transforming the world around us through transforming power, very consciously transforming power. And that looks like this. It is already happening right now. Practitioners of deep medicine are responsible for the greatest drop of greenhouse gases from the United States and Canada. The indigenous-led pipeline resistance has done more than any climate accord because these people are motivated. They want to see their great-great-grandchildren living in health. And they want to see all of us with the opportunity to live in health. And the time to start thinking about deep medicine could not be more relevant. Because just as we are inflamed, the Earth's body is inflamed. So her rivers are our blood, and her soil is our gut, and her forests are our lungs, are how we breathe. And these aren't metaphors. This is about remembering who we are. The forest around us is on fire because of the logic of colonial capitalism, the extraction and destruction of critical relationships that kept things in balance. And the forests inside of us are also denuded. So when we think about the most potent resistor or modulator of chronic inflammation in our bodies, the more than human organisms that live on us and inside us, the human microbiota, play a critical role in modulating inflammation. These organisms in our gut that are tucked away in the tiny folds of our fetal intestines are already helping our bodies learn how to host other creatures, how to be good hosts and tolerate guests. These organisms are turning on and off the genes that regulate our own neurobiology. So when you think of that, it makes you really think about who we are as individuals if our health is completely predicated on the presence of millions of other organisms that are non-human. When scientists look at the microbiota of humans around the world, they found that those that were the most denuded were those who lived in the US and urban centers. Those with the most biodiverse guts on Earth are people who are living close to the Earth with cosmologies of reciprocity and care. What we know is there's an association between biodiversity of our gut microflora and the lowering of chronic inflammatory disease. I just had a friend, Warani, indigenous activist Namonte Nankemo, came to visit us at the farm. She lives with the uncontacted tribes deep in the Amazon. She's been involved in protecting 500,000 acres. She said her community has gotten sick 3 times, 3 separate waves of COVID. They had several dreams about what plants to use in their communities. 2,500 people got sick and not 1 person died, which to me was shocking to hear. The community of Warani people who did die were the people who were living close to the petroleum and amongst the petroleum workers there in the Amazon. When you think about how indigenous ways of knowing steward biodiversity inside their guts, it's also important to know that indigenous ways of knowing are stewarding the greatest biodiversity on the planet. The UN just released a report this week that called for large-scale initiatives to give land back to indigenous people because they know how to relate. And it is a way of knowing that we have not had the opportunity to have, those of us who've been raised in colonial capitalist mindsets. So it's an important time to learn, an important time to uplift and walk beside our indigenous communities to remember the things that we have all had in our ancestries, which is ways of living with the earth that were bound in duties of care. This is the work that we're doing with the Deep Medicine Circle and that we're walking with Kata here on. We started to think, can we create a model of what a revolution would look like through the food system? Can we build a food system that creates climate justice, health justice, racial justice, and economic justice? And we are doing that. Just up the way, 45 minutes up on the coast in what is now called San Gregorio. We had a renaming ceremony last weekend to give the farm its Ramaytush name, Tekwe Anyawayap, which means honor Mother Earth. And this is a partnership between the Muchiate Indigenous Land Trust that was founded by Kata, the American Indian Cultural District, Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation, Friendship House, Peninsula Open Space Trust, and us with the Deep Medicine Circle. So we are moving this land back to Muchiate Indigenous Land Trust, and then we are farming under indigenous concepts of land care, earth care, people care. We are located right here, so if you want to come see us, come do that. This site is close to where Portola landed and started his conquest. And when his crew got sick, they camped at the mouth of the river that runs through the land. And the native people who lived in the watershed came down and offered the food and medicine that are still present there at the farm, the native California foods and medicines. We're also working in the urban space on a 1-acre rooftop farm. This is Elena Reed. She's our rooftop farm director. This is in the territory of Huchin, what is now called Oakland, California. All the food that we grow at these farms are given away to people who are suffering under the manufactured crisis of hunger in Oakland and in San Francisco. When we look at the food system that we are, the predominant food system model, this is what it looks like. It starts with stolen land, and it's based in extractivist principles. There's damage to the soil through tillage. There's damage to the soil microbiology through the application of synthetic fossil fuel-based pesticides and fertilizers. We're seeing a loss of nutrient density of the food with those practices. We're seeing decreased yield. We're seeing pesticide residue on the foods. And these are often the foods that are given to people who are hungry at the food banks, the dregs of conventional agriculture that then they eat and impact their own microflora through that pesticide exposure. What is the outcome of this food system is climate change, is damaged soils, is erasure of indigenous knowledge and perspective, is damage to our farm laborers. They've been particularly hit hard in COVID. You can see the spaces and the ways they've been incarcerated. Exploitation of labor and drought and wildfire. So this is what revolution looks like. We go clockwise because that's what we do in these territories. We give land back. So our work starts with getting land back to indigenous people. We reframe farmers as ecological stewards, so stewards of our health, stewards of the soil, stewards of the water. We respect Indigenous sovereignty and work to help Kata reconnect with her language and basket weaving and her ways of knowing so that we can help uplift that knowledge as it comes back, how we can learn to be in a circle together. What we see is an increase in soil biodiversity when you farm with Indigenous TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, and agroecology. You see increased CO2 sequestration, decreased pollution, increased nutrient density of the food. We are climate adapting our seeds now to be prepared as the heat rises and the water levels fall. We give our food away at zero barrier access, so we are decommodifying our food. We are removing it from the colonial capitalist system to be reoffered again as medicine to the people. We are going to be tracking this over the next 3 years to show what happens to the health of our communities, what happens to the health of our soil, what happens to the health of our water, and what happens to the health of our Indigenous people when we farm in this way. These are some of the things we're looking at in terms of the interconnections between the microbiology, what's happening in our bodies, what's happening in our soil, what's happening in the plants. So farming is medicine. A cornerstone project of the Deep Medicine Circle is advancing climate justice, health justice, racial justice, and economic justice. And it's doing that through inverting power structures. And that's really important to understand that revolution can happen through conscious choice of how we flip our relationships. So land back, farmers are health stewards, decommodification of food, and reasserting food as medicine. Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, what a beginning. One more round of applause, please. Ah. Wow. What a start. Thank you so much. Okay, we are back for a discussion with Dr. Maria. Thank you so much for being here and for this amazing presentation, performance, really, really inspiring. It's not working? It's on. So we open now the session for questions. And I wanted to start with a question that actually it's coming from a participant on Zoom. Dr. Maria, what was the process of writing Inflamed? How was it for you? What were you most excited to write about, and what weighed heaviest on you?
So I wasn't looking to write a book. I'm not a writer. I guess I write now. But my friend Raj Patel, who is a phenomenal writer, a political ecologist, a food systems activist, a filmmaker, I gave a talk at UT Austin, a grand rounds, on the work I was doing around racism and police violence as a public health threat. So I had assisted as the doctor for the Frisco 5 hunger strike, and the people who were on hunger strike in San Francisco protesting racist police violence allowed me to accompany them because of my music. They knew me through the music scene. I played the Power to the Peaceful concert. And so when I showed up and I was like, I was concerned about my community members being shot by the police in San Francisco, they were like, oh yeah, we know her, she's cool. And so through accompanying them in that process and seeing how the body was being used as a political tool, and how important to realize how history and power is sediment in our bodies. That in 2016, through that, and then through being invited by California Native people out to Standing Rock because the police were becoming more violent there. So I went out to do medical response, and the grandmothers asked me to do more work there. Those ways of engaging really helped clarify for me what I had intuited over the prior 15 years of touring as a musician. So I've always I did a double major UCSD in molecular biology and theater. So I've always been this person who's felt most nourished by continuing to have many ways of knowing and being. And so when I became a doctor, I went through med school, started residency at UCSF, and they asked me, I went in after my intern year and I said, I can't do this full time. There's no way. I said, I have to be like 50-50 physician and artist, and I don't know how I'm gonna do that. And they said, well, there's this flexible track for women having babies. You wanna do that? I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. So I made a terrible salary as a resident. I was like half a resident for 5 years. But I started my band and I started touring around the world, and that changed my life because I finally saw how medicine and music were going together. Now, throughout my career, people would tell me, oh, that music is your hobby. But in fact, music was the way I'd take my band to play these major festivals, and then we'd go sneak into the slums of Roma people camped on the train tracks and in trailers and learn about the legacies of racism of the Roma people in Europe. We'd learn about the slums of Ahmedabad and the religious tensions and terrors there. We learned about going along the US-Mexico border and interviewing people on both sides. So music very quickly became a way of social investigation for me. And it was through these investigations that I started to notice what I would call a colonized syndrome. Why did these indigenous communities around the world, including the Irish, the first colonized place of the UK, of the British Empire, higher rates of diabetes, higher rates of these diseases that I called colonized diseases? And it wasn't until the last 10 years where I started to understand, no, these are all diseases with a similar pathogenesis. These are all diseases coming from an inflammatory state. And so when I started piecing these things together, Raj looked at me and said, let's write a book. And I thought he was joking. And so we started thinking about the book in 2017, outlined the ideas and the chapters. And then it was in 2019, December, we send off our proposal to his agent. And she's like, no one knows what decolonization is. You have to rewrite this. This is terrible. So we're like, okay, let's think it. And so we worked for 3 months on rewriting the proposal. We send it off. I saw the first, I was on the floor with the first COVID patient who came from the Japanese cruise ship on 15 Long at UCSF. My patient got sick 5 doors down. He was there with a urinary tract infection and went to the ICU with hypoxia in like 5 hours. I've never seen someone get so sick. I got sick the next 2 days, and then the book sold before going to auction. So like right when the pandemic hit, the book was gonna be written. And it was the most unreal experience to wake up every morning at 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, because I have 2 young children, and write for 4 hours and debate with Raj. Every morning at 5 o'clock, we had a standing debate time about these issues as they were unfolding, as we were watching George Floyd being murdered, as we were watching the uprising, as we were watching finally people tumbling the statues of Christopher Columbus and Junipero Serra, as we started understanding these narratives coming forth that had been held down for so long. And so that is, it was a very challenging experience to write this book, because I was going into the hospital, seeing these patients on the wards, afraid for my own health and the health of my children, and then seeing my elders in India die, so many people, and then coming back and writing the history and legacies that led us to this moment. So there were some times where I was researching, let's say, the discovery of interleukin-1 as a thing that drives fever in the body. I was researching that for a week straight, reading all these historical documents and noticing the violence against animals that was required to advance scientific knowledge in Western medicine. And really understanding that my knowledge was based in this violence, the violence towards enslaved women, Black women in this country, the violence towards Indigenous people through medicine. And I called Raj one day and I was like, I'm gonna just cry for the next week. I don't wanna look at this stuff, I can't do it. It's just because it's all being played out right now with COVID. So it was almost like the book was a Pandora's box that we opened, and as we were writing it, all the things we were writing about. We started writing about residential schools as ways of recreating colonial capitalist cosmology. Then 215 children were found dead. Now 10,000 children have been found in these residential schools. The genocide just coming up, the bones are coming up to tell their stories. And so it was a very traumatic experience to write this book. And it was also a very relieving experience, because I finally was able to sit with Raj and uplift the stories of all the deep medicine practitioners we know around the world, all the communities we see happening all over the world who are organizing and fighting and determining their own models of health and wellness, and trying to mobilize the resources to build autonomous networks of health and wellness. So it was good and challenging. I've never done anything so hard, except for childbirth.
Thank you. Anyone in the audience have a question? There's some mics circulating. Yes? I don't see a hand. Oh, there's a hand here. Thank you. Can you please introduce yourself? Oh, the mic is coming. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Nadia Peralta. I'm a community herbalist here in Santa Cruz, as well as just a member of the Run for Salmon Medic team, and just have been working with a lot of different people over the years here with these lands and these places. So thank you for bringing such a interwoven and interconnected way of relating to these so many myriad things. And so I guess my question is, as a professor and as it seems like also as a teacher and as a scholar, and I'm sure as an herbalist and a farmer and all these things that you do, how are you met in your practice as a doctor, teaching these things, like your colleagues, with the institution? Because, you know, I feel like you're very bravely, or my experience of like receiving your work, speaking back to power and asking for power to really be redistributed. And like, how are you met, like kind of like Alexi brought in with his opening remarks too, like we're here at the UC. There's been some of us fighting for many years to get the UC Santa Cruz to listen to us about not expanding into upper campus up here, to not build on the meadows that everyone saw when they came in today, from this place of acknowledging that it's not just a matter of aesthetic or desire, but like the cultural resources for the descendants of the people enslaved at Mission Santa Cruz. So I'm curious, just like, because land back is a really powerful thing, and land back is a way to change power. And right now, the UC is holding so much land. And so I'm just, I don't know I think you probably are starting to understand my question, just like, how are you continuing to walk that walk day to day with these institutions, I guess?
Thank you. First of all, I hope to see you on Run for Salmon.
Yeah.
So Chief Colleen is one of those practitioners of deep medicine we highlight in the work. She's a chief of the Winnemem Wintu, and she has been bringing back salmon songs, salmon ceremonies, and a beautiful walk from Sigorate, from the mouth of the bay, all the way up to the McCloud River at the base of Shasta, or Buyumpuyuk, the sacred mountain. If you have a chance to learn about Run for Salmon, participate in Run for Salmon, it is probably the most inspiring thing I have experienced in many years. So how have I been received by power? I've been threatened, silenced, attempted to silence, cajoled, harassed, intimidated at the highest levels of power at my institution. And so that's what white supremacy does. That's how it operates. Does it stop me? No. It's just, I can't, once you see the things that we outline in this book, you can't unsee them. And then you're walking in the hospital and you're watching what's going down, you can't unsee it. There was this moment, I'll tell this little anecdote because it makes me chuckle, even though it's really depressing. There was this period as a hospital medicine doctor where I was called in by my supervisors 7 different times for being aggressive, for being disruptive, for being unprofessional. And I was like, oh my God, what is going on with me? There must be something really wrong with me. I was breastfeeding 2 children. Maybe I was just tired and cranky. I was like, whatever. So I said, this is like 7 different times. This is like now a pattern. I said, I'm going to go to the Office of Faculty Development and take some coaching. Maybe I have a communication problem. So I went and they were like, oh, thank you so much, Rupa, that would be great. And so I go to the Office of Faculty Development and I start outlining every one of these situations. And this white coach, this guy, stops me at number 5 and he goes, do you realize that every situation you're describing, you are advocating either for yourself or a Black patient? And I was like, oh, really? And he said, I can't help you with your communication. I can help you survive a toxic, racist work environment. And so I wrote that to my leadership in my department, and I said, thank you. I went to this class, and this was the feedback. And they unanimously wrote back, this is why you're a leader here at UCSF. So, some of those people are some of my friends, right? And so I have many friends who are walking with white embodied privilege, who don't know how to change the system and have no radical imagination, even though they have MLK quotes on their walls. And so how do we bring those people along to see that people are being damaged by their grip on power? So this is a very delicate dynamic and situation, and I don't always handle it very well. But I've often been labeled as aggressive and unprofessional, right, Shri? Chuckle. I'm not one to, I've got a really loud mouth. I like to sing. And so for me, I'm not afraid to poke the bear, as Kata tells me. I found someone else who's not afraid to poke the bear. It is a time to do that. It is a time to stand and say, okay, actually these cultural resources are vital, not only for the Native people here, but for all of us who are guests here. Because when our Native people have those relationships to those things, we have relationships to our Native people, there's a different kind of harmony that happens. And that harmony has never existed in these lands. And what if that harmony did? What kind of guests would we be here? What kind of ways would we know that we actually can't even be open to seeing right now? Because we don't even know them. And so that's the cultural revolution. And that's a very exciting thing. Because when we connect, and that's what I felt like on Run for Salmon, when I started to hear Chief Colleen tell these stories, I was like, oh my God, I got shivers in my spine. Just like, why have I never heard these stories? They're beautiful stories. And that's when you realize how important stories are to our knowing. And so if we are limited in our stories to just power and the will to power, we're gonna miss out on all this interrelationship that makes life beautiful every day. And not only that, it can ensure safety on this earth for our children, our grandchildren, all the seeds that need to be stewarded for their wellness and their health. And so that's what I'm interested in doing.
Yes, very, very beautiful. Thank you so much. Can you tell us about what influence did growing up in Silicon Valley have on developing your practice in deep medicine, if any?
Well, Silicon Valley is just such a place of great, grotesque wealth disparity and power disparity. And actually, Hitler came here to the United States to learn about eugenics. He went and studied what happened to the Native Americans and went back there and said, oh, let's use this as our final solution, right? Eugenics was codified here at Stanford and UCSF. There are professors still in power and in position at UCSF who were involved in eugenics, practices of eugenics. Howard Maybach was practicing injecting prisoners with pesticides up at San Quentin, and that IRB was held at UCSF. So we have to reckon with these dynamics of power. This is real, this is uncomfortable, but this is our history. And if we look away from it, we're not gonna move forward. We're not gonna be in alignment with the kind of true healing that needs to happen as institutions, as people. I love the UC system. I'm a product of the UC system. I love to be here, and I want to see it realize its potential as a place for all Californians, all people who live in these lands, to be uplifted and educated, for the lands to be stewarded correctly, not just through Indigenous people stewarding them, but giving the land back. The UC is the biggest holder of land in the whole state. Let's give some of it back and see how we can create novel partnerships that will uplift all of humanity. And so that is what I'm really excited about.
Thank you. One more question from the audience. Can we have a mic, please? Can you introduce yourself briefly? Thank you.
I'm Manya. I went to UC Santa Cruz. I now work in New York. But first of all, thank you so much for your incredible talk. I feel like I was just discussing this with my friend that I work in academia at Columbia Medical Center in New York, and it's incredible. It's very fulfilling, but it also, I very much find myself getting lost in the system a lot, especially as someone who is very new in her career, and like I want to advance in academia. I very much fell in love with academia, but I do find, especially in incredibly colonial systems like Columbia, getting lost in kind of the rhetoric of research and academia. And so your talk was very refreshing to like reground myself in kind of my purpose and why I'm actually going down the path that I want to go down. So my question is to you, how do you find that you stay grounded in your principles and in this, in your belief of deep medicine in such high levels of academia, where it can be very colonial and elitist, and these systems can be very like suffocating? So how do you stay grounded in that?
Well, my friend Madhavi Dandu just texted me on a thread with Shri and Fook. So I have a trifecta of friends. I have colleagues who I love dearly, who stand with me in solidarity when I put my neck out. So those people have been critical to my feeling my way through this. It's not for everybody. I had a Black medical student who was one of my favorite people I've met in the last 10 years as a professor, who quit because it was too racist. And it was heartbreaking for me to see such a brilliant young woman who we need serving community say, I can't. And it was not for me to tell her, oh, just suck it up and go through it and get your degree and get on, you know? I can't do that because I'm not walking in a Black female body. And so I have very good friends who I love and respect, whose work I love and respect. And then I have elders like Kata. I have my brothers in music who are my sanity, this is the first show we're playing at 5 o'clock, I hope you all come, that we played since we played to like thousands of people in Germany in 2019. So I am just so grateful that we finally get to play, and that's medicine for me. It grounds me, it reminds me who I am. I put my feet on the earth every day and say thank you. I farm with my husband, who's a farmer. I learn about the plants and the seeds. I don't make my life my job at UCSF, even though I love what I do, but I take time to build my community bigger than what we learn as health as doctors. So I've always been friends with philosophers and activists and artists and troublemakers and cooks, and I like that. I need that because I get bored around the same people doing the same thing. So I say cast your net really big and bring a lot of people into your circle and have them teach you, even people in tech. Like, so we talk about Silicon Valley, there's so many people here who want to learn how to get out of this mindset. They don't know how to get out. So working with artists, working across disciplines is such a critical piece of this work, because not one of us can have all of the answers, right? So the wound that we're facing right now as a human species is a wound that's too big for any one of us to heal. We actually can only heal it through this kind of bringing together and weaving different knowledge systems together, because we're all carrying an important piece of that work. So I survive it by not taking it too seriously. I've never really wanted to be an academic, but I love being around residents and students, and I love being in a community of learners. And so those are the ways. Does that help? I should also say I've never worked more than 60, no, I shouldn't say that. I've never worked more than 67% FTE. So I've always been the best paid musician and the worst paid doctor in San Francisco. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Rupa, that leads to something I would like to hear you share with the community here, is your vision with Sage La Peña and how that is helping to create a different perspective on healthcare.
Rupa, can you just say who the...
So Kata just asked me, our Ramatush elder just asked me to explain the vision with Sage La Peña, who is a Namtapamwintu, California herbal indigenous, incredible walking encyclopedia of plant knowledge and healing. She works at the Sacramento Native American Health Center and now works with the Deep Medicine Circle as our director of indigenous traditional ecological knowledge and plant medicine. So when I went out to Standing Rock and served there, the grandmothers there asked me if I would help them create a clinic to decolonize food and medicine. And so that quickly became a clinic and a farm, and then it became the Mini-Wichoni Health Circle. Tasha Peltier and Elena Eagle-Shield are doing wonderful work there, which is actually nothing short of nation building, outside of the tribal council and that colonial structure, but grassroots building around food and shelter and energy and waste management and health. And so, of course, when I was out there, our Native community here, I remember Karina Gould asked me, like, where's our clinic? Where's our farm? I was like, I don't do this. I don't do clinics and farms. I'm a musician. But no, I do clinics and farms. So what the vision Sage and I have been having is to start creating a clinic to decolonize medicine here in these territories. So bringing people back to land, bringing multiple kinds of a pluriverse of healing perspectives together that can address the kinds of chronic inflammatory issues communities are facing, and how we can use the earth and the healing that the earth provides through food and medicine and through connectedness to help heal in different ways. So we are looking right now, we're starting to prototype some of this work at the Teque Anawere farm in San Gregorio. And we are building out an herbal apothecary in a 6,000 square foot barn to start making medicines for our communities. And Sage and I are just starting to imagine into being what a different kind of clinical practice would look like that would be more relevant to our communities.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna, we have to move on with our program. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Rupa
Ndola.
Marya, for being here with us.